So what are the best decks in the game? Obviously, Whirlkick Rogue is number one. I think Evolved Shaman got hit harder with the nerfs than Rogue did with its nerfs, because Edwin isn't like the main thing that wins Rogues its game, right? Rogues win games by being able to play a ton of cards, generate almost endless resources, draw 4 cards for 1 mana, cheat out cards like Foxy Fraud into something else, get a ton of resources off of Whirlkick Master, along with lackeys and stuff, and snowball a little bit with Questing Adventure and maybe Edwin a little bit later on. Yes, you're not able to cheese out Edwin as early anymore, which means that a couple of games that you might have won otherwise, you might not. But even in those situations, like even some of those games where you cheesed out Edwin, you probably would have won without Edwin, right? So I feel like this deck, its core is still ridiculously strong. It didn't lose that much. And I really think that this is still going to be the best deck. It may not be the best. I might be underestimating how big Edwin is going to be, but it will definitely be in the top 5, which is why I'm putting it on this list. So I think this deck is extremely good. I think this deck is talked about by very few people. This is Bomb Warrior. I don't know why the name is not there, but this deck has pretty solid removal. It has good early game removal because Minefield has been added to the pool of cards Warrior has access to, and being able to kill off most early game aggressive decks immediately on turn 2, and then being able to stabilize the board again around turn 3 or 4 with your weapon or something like that, actually helps this deck out a lot. Not to mention the fact that rogues draw a lot of cards. Wrench Caliber means they'll draw bombs, and you run weapon removal. People are going to be running less weapon removal because Shaman's going to be a little bit worse, which means that you'll be able to stick Wrench Caliber on the board a little bit more consistently. Warlock is a class that I think will increase in popularity quite a bit, and it draws a ton of cards, so your bombs will kill them. Pure Paladin is supposed to be pure. You get the Wrench Caliber to put a bomb in their deck, they no longer get pure synergy. Highlander gets wrecked because it's no longer Highlander. Let's see. OTK Demon Hunter, it reshuffles the deck, or any pull Celt deck for that matter. It reshuffles the deck every time you put a bomb in. It's just, this deck like low-key counters so many decks in the meta, while also being able to just be a really strong deck on its own. It's got good late game with Galakrond. Blastmaster Boom turns 7, even if you only have like 2 bombs in their deck, can be extremely powerful. It's got good removal, like I said, with Barov and Brawl. I think this deck has just like a jack of all trades, pretty good at everything, low-key counters a ton of stuff. The only thing it doesn't counter is weapon-based decks, which is ironic considering this is a weapon-based deck, but it's okay because Evolved Shaman, basically you just Brawl or Barov and wipe the board, and then restabilize from there, and you're usually fine. Weapons aren't that big of a deal. And very hard aggro decks do beat this deck, but again, since Rogue was slightly nerfed, and Hunter and Demon Hunter were nerfed like a month ago, this deck has just everything going for it to be really strong. So, deck number 3 is Tickatus Warlock, and this is more of like a prediction of what I think is going to happen in the next week. And with the new mini expansion, I think Tickatus Warlock has the potential to gain just a little bit more. I feel like there are a few small things that it's missing, or tweaks, like just a little bit more healing to help you not lose to aggro decks. And if the mini expansion gives them one more good removal tool, or one more really good form of healing, which means you can take out this extra sticky fingers and maybe Siamat to put in that extra healing, I feel like this deck has the potential to be so good. And even without it, I'm personally like 12-7 with this deck, which is not outstanding, not meta breaking, but still very good. And it generally struggled against Evolved Shaman and Rogue the most because it couldn't deal with the early game, the pressure that those two decks are able to do, or at least the mid game pressure. But now, since the meta might slow down a little bit, and the mini expansion hopefully slows the meta down a little bit, having some counters to some of the aggro decks, I feel like Tickatus has a really good chance to shine here. And I'm excited to see it. I think it's really annoying, but I also really do like having cards that interact with the opponent, like burning their cards. It can disrupt OTKs, and personally, I think that there is some potential here. I think it's really strong. So after playing Pure and Libroom Paladin for a while, I actually decided that I think Libroom Paladin is a better deck. The reason why is because Pure Paladin is extremely linear. People know how to play against it. You basically kill the minion so they can't pump it up. If they never get board presence, they just lose. Whereas Libroom Paladin is kind of similar, with some big minions and some decent pumps, but you have a little bit better removal because you have Barov and Broomsticks, you have Avenging Wrath, you have late game or more late game potential with Yogg-Saron and the Penflingers to chip away at their health if you're going into a slower matchup. And yes, it does have its fair share of counters, but I think that this deck definitely is strong. It's not that expensive. For example, like, you don't have to run High Abyss Allura, and Yogg-Saron you could also probably take out as well because he's really just a late game card to help you win the game, and you could just run another Loot Hoarder and maybe another Hammer of Naru to reduce the cost of this deck by about 3,000, and just like that, the deck is at least a little bit more budget friendly. Overall, I will say this deck is kind of hard to play because you have to figure out how to wiggle in Penflingers every single turn, and although it's not the most complicated deck, it does have a little bit of a learning curve, so you won't necessarily jump in and immediately become super good at the deck, but just know that after like 5-10 games where you start to get the hang of it and you start realizing when to use the Penflingers, when to use Penflingers to kill minions, and when to use them to go face and all those things, this deck will definitely start doing well for you. So even though Evolved Shaman got nerfed, I think it's still an extremely powerful deck because of two reasons. One, it still has all the same things that made it strong, and with the meta probably becoming a little bit slower because this deck isn't as prominent, this deck can take advantage of the decks that come into the meta now, right? Like, this deck's biggest weakness is aggro, and I don't think aggro is going to become, like, insane again. Like, it's still going to be strong, and there are going to be its fair share of aggro decks in the meta, but I think that the meta will slow down a little bit with the Rogue and the Shaman nerf, and because of that, Shaman will shine a little bit more, not because it's busted, but because of the matchups it'll go against. Second, people will probably start running a little less weapon removal because they're not going to be playing against as many Shamans because it's not as strong as it once was, and both of those things combined will make, obviously, its much lower win rate now go up a little bit and make this, in the end, a pretty decent deck. It's also relatively cheap. It has a couple of epics that you need, like Sea Giant and Knuckles, but you don't need Fireheart. You could take Fireheart out for the portal, and even though the win rate right here says that Shaman has dropped to a 48.5% win rate and has dropped from a top class to a middle of the pack class, that's probably because the nerfs just came out. People are experimenting with new things, trying to force the same Evolved Shaman deck without understanding the fact that it's weaker, so you might have to play around power spikes a little bit differently. And I can easily see this deck rising up 1 or 2 more spots, especially at lower ranks where people don't know how to deal with surprise wide boards. I do think Control Shaman has potential, so if you want to play Shaman, there is another deck out there right now. I'm going to play test it soon. But yeah, I think this one has a decent amount of promise, and it's cheap, so I would recommend it still personally. It's not as oppressive, so you probably won't get flamed as much for playing the deck, and I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, last bonus deck. I think Demon Hunter, OTK Demon Hunter to be specific, has more potential than people give it credit for. I think that this deck is pretty decent. Most of the time I play this deck, I currently am 10-6 with it, and I've never played this deck before, and it's a pretty hard deck. So considering the fact that I'm already 10-6 with it, and I can actually think back to 2 misplays that literally lost me the game because I did not know how much damage I did. Like, I committed to my combo a turn early because I thought I had the damage, and I didn't because I can't add, I guess. But anyway, despite the fact that I made misplays learning the game, I'm still 10-6. It draws a lot of cards. It has a decent amount of removal and lifesteal, so aggro decks can't beat you. It deals pretty well with Rogue, actually, because they can't heal or gain armor, so your combo consistently kills them. And their boards are small enough to where Emolition Aura can usually just destroy their board. And it's fairly consistent as well because you have so much draw. I don't know. This is up to your own interpretation. I think it has a lot of potential, but it might not be like an outstanding deck. Some people ask me what I would replace for Blood Mage Thalnos, by the way. And I would say one of 2 things. Maybe another Philosophy, or honestly, I think a decent replacement for that card is actually the Kobold. The one that gives you spell damage, the Kobold Geomancer. Because, yes, the draw is good, but sometimes just playing it with Emolition Aura to do 3 damage to the board is all you use Blood Mage Thalnos for. So a budget deck could use the Geomancer and it would be fine. And, yeah, overall, I think this deck is quite strong. I think it's underrated. And the Polkelt nerf, although it does suck, does lead into a Skull of Gul'dan play better now that it's 5 mana, so, like, it's not even that big of a deal. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next one, and the next one will have the mini set be released, so obviously the meta is going to shift quite a bit with that one. I'll see you guys then.